Hey Stan, it's Deb Tully, Ohio Federation of Teachers. I have a really specific question to you about the budget bill and a particular requirement. As you know, the list came out this weekend of the teachers that have to be retested for their licensing exams if they're in the bottom percentile of districts in the state. And so you can imagine my phone's been ringing off the wall this weekend, and I would like to be able to tell our people how you're planning to implement this. So if you can give me a little outline of how you plan to implement this requirement, including timelines, and I know teachers don't have to pay for it, but I'm sure some of the districts and school boards in here would like to also know who's paying for this as well. So if you could give us some indication of how that's going to be handled, it'd be great.
So for people in the audience, House Bill 153 requires, among other things, that teachers who, when you rate or rank all of the school districts by performance index, the schools that are in the bottom 10%, the teachers who belong in those schools, they need to be retested to make sure that they can demonstrate that they know the subject matter that they're supposed to teach. If they have not tested within 3 years of the designation, and then at that point in time they have to engage in the test. So, by the way, the initial language talked about districts, which would have been even crazier. So we're looking, and I forget the exact number, it's like 8,000 teachers potentially, 5,900 teachers, and I know you would know that. So that's a lot of people. So the current test is Praxis. There are, and I can't think of the name of the other one, it just suddenly escapes me, but there are two major teacher tests. Praxis being one of an Ohio adopted Praxis back in like 2007, and then there's this other one. Thank you, Principles of Teaching and Learning. The larger states generally tend to go with Praxis, the smaller populated states generally tend to go with the other one. So there are two questions in my mind. One is, Praxis is a test that was designed specifically for students exiting a college preparation program to see whether or not they learned what they needed to know. I don't know whether or not the construct validity of that test still applies for teachers who've been in the classroom. So the first thing we have to look at is see whether or not we have the right test. Second thing is that since 2007, the Praxis has been the test of choice in Ohio. If we're going to expand its application and we're going to make sure, and we're going to do this additional testing, it may be wise for the department to issue an RFP and see if we can get a better deal for districts and everybody else on what the cost of these tests are going to be. So that has slowed a little bit about our decision making about exactly when, how, and where, and all of that kind of thing. We also know that districts need to prepare for the payments of the cost for these, and that teachers need to know what's happening. We can tell you that the teachers who were listed for this school in this last report card, there was a pass. So we really start in the teaching at the end of the next school year. So that gives us a little bit of time to work our way through these. But if we're going to submit, or we're going to subject people to the test, I want to make sure it's the right test and it's designed specifically for that purpose. I also want to protect taxpayer interest that we get the test at the best cost. So we're going a little slower, but we're going to do it right.
I just wanted to follow up on Deb Tully's inquiry. Of these schools that are in the bottom 5%, many of them are serving special needs kids, dropout recovery, special education kids. Yet there's no classification for that at ODE right now. Is that going to be factored in somehow when we prosecute this retraining of teachers, taking into consideration some of the students that are being taught in these low 5%?
So there are different purposes for the ranking system. You can get in the lower 5% of performing schools. If you're there 3 years in a row, you're subject for sanctions. That's different from being in the, if you're a community school sponsor and you've got schools in the bottom 20%, you're not allowed to increase the number of schools that you sponsor. And then we have the one with the teachers if you're in the bottom 10% of the schools. So Bill's question is when certain of these schools, and they would be like community schools, are specialty, they deal with autistic kids or they deal with special education populations, does that take anything into account? I don't believe that there is an exception that's available currently in law. And I know that the testing is only in one area of content, as I recall correctly. So I think those are things that we're going to have to work our way through. Again, that's kind of back to Deb's question. I don't want to move quickly because these are the very kind of issues that you raise. I mean, they're going to come to life out in the districts, and we need to be ready for them. Right. Right, so I think everybody heard Debbie, but what she basically was saying is there may be national board certified teachers who are working side by side in colleagues in these poor performing schools. So it may not be that person's, they didn't contribute to the poor performance, but they're in the school. If you want highly qualified people in these kind of schools, does the system work against them? Does it act as a disincentive? I think that was the point, right? So I don't believe in the rulemaking authority we've got a lot of discretion, but let me go back and double check that, because I'm totally sure, but I think it's a point well filling this mission, we're all for it. Second thing is, believe it or not, we want critical friends. We want people to keep us grounded and make sure that we understand that what we're doing actually makes good sense for Scott Public Schools. It's pretty simple to sit in a bubble sometime and think this will all be wonderful and good, and then we find out in the implementation phase, not so good. So when I get called on things like the teacher testing, that's exactly right, because it's still a real world. So we want the good critical friends as well as the partners. And then the last part is, to the extent that you can help us with carrying the message, we cannot do this ourselves. We need your help, we need your continued support, and we need your voice.